I was born in Minnesota. I was born in Minneapolis specifically, and I think it's interesting. I've been seeing a lot of news about Minnesota lately. I haven't lived there in many years, but I've been seeing a lot of news about Minnesota, a lot about massive corruption on every level of the local government and the state government and local governments. And a lot of it pertains to the Somali community in the Twin Cities mostly. And I think it's very interesting to see that as someone who hasn't lived there for a long time and sort of see all this, all this controversy and all this debate about what's happened since I moved away. And it is, I can't say that it is a surprise that any of that has happened, that there's massive corruption and there's massive increase in Somali immigrants and living in Minnesota and all these kinds of things, because that was I don't think it wasn't as large as it is today, but there was a Somali community in the Twin Cities when I lived in Minnesota, and it really the corruption is 100% the result of the extreme left wing, extremely monolithic sort of political culture that exists in Minnesota. Anyway, it's been that way my whole life. I had no idea how extremely, how much of a uniparty rule it was, and how left leaning everyone in Minnesota, or not everyone, most of the people, I would say, there's a decent percentage who aren't, but most people in Minnesota are pretty far left, just being honest about it. And I didn't realize that growing up there until I moved away, which is funny because I moved to a city and a state that was also, overall pretty left leaning, but it wasn't quite as extreme. And so then that was quite the wake up call, kind of got me out of my bubble and made me think more broadly about political issues, because I always considered myself very, very smart and very wise and very, very cynical and very critical about everything political, because I read a lot about politics, and I've always been very interested. I've always been fascinated by politics as a subject, and so growing up until I was in my early 20s when I moved away, I thought, and I did start to question things shortly before I moved, but it was really moving to another city to another state that had a more thorough transformative effect. But I just didn't realize how much of a bubble Minnesota really was. How much of just how uniform everyone's opinions really were. How in lockstep almost everyone was about what the right political opinion was, and about how what the right opinion is, which is just the right set of values and the right set of beliefs. And there's practically no one who thought differently or gave voice to different thoughts. And so it was very, maybe cultish is an exaggeration, but it was pretty uniform, and everyone pretty much just parroted the same things, and everyone had the same beliefs, and there was really no meaningful input from the other side. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that Minnesota has all these problems, because when you have such a uniform, orthodox kind of kind of set of values and orthodox way of thinking, and people are not allowed really to have openly different views on things. You know, they're not allowed to openly give voice to any different beliefs, and, you know, they really challenge kind of the tacitly accepted dogma. Then, I mean, that's, you know, then corruption with it's like with I don't know how to say it, like using the immigrant community and the Twin Cities, using them as a means to facilitate massive corruption must have been the easiest thing in the world for the governor of Minnesota and all these other, you know, everyone involved on every level who is allegedly, probably, you know, I'm not saying definitely, but I think that's realistic to think that they probably are complicit in a lot of fraud. That wouldn't shock me at all. I would, you know, I can completely see that, because, well, you know, when you have a very politically homogenous kind of social consciousness in a democracy, in a democratic system, then it's very easy to facilitate corruption using something that is politically desirable and something that is not questioned. You know, because like in Minnesota, so I mean, like the immigrant community, the Somali community, people are not allowed to question it. You know, they're not allowed to ask questions about it, because then they get labeled as racist, and they get they're afraid to. People are just afraid to, and they, you know, not even consciously, like the people in Minnesota, not even, you know, they're not even consciously, for the most part, aware of that. They just, you know, they just don't do it. They're kind of trained to not ask questions about certain topics because it is not politically palatable, you know, because it strays outside of their unwitting orthodoxy, and so they don't ask questions, and they just, you know, they'll just overlook anything. They don't look with a critical eye at certain people because they're not allowed to. They're strongly encouraged from birth to not look at people, you know, just look at certain people, not ask questions about certain people, not think about certain things. And it's not necessarily, you know, a lot of them, I'm sure a lot of them are very aware of it and just afraid, but also I think most people living there who have those beliefs probably, you know, based on my personal experience living there, I think they probably just don't even think about it. They're just living in this bubble that I also lived in, and so I get it. I completely get it. When you're raised in that kind of bubble, you just don't necessarily think about these things. You know, it's just no. You're just, you know, honestly, it's kind of an interesting, kind of a weird experience living up there, because in a lot of ways you're really like kind of isolated from the rest of the country. I mean, obviously you're not truly isolated, but there's just this different kind of culture up there where it's like you feel kind of distinct, and you feel like, you know, you don't really feel like part of the United States sometimes. I mean, obviously, you know, they are, but that was my experience anyway. It was like, it kind of feels like you're out on your own there, and so I think they just have an interesting kind of idiosyncratic culture that is not necessarily understandable unless you've experienced it. And so anyway, so you grow up in that bubble, and then you just kind of you don't question things, you don't really think about things, and you're convinced that you're the smartest person in the room. You know, you're convinced that, like, oh, I'm the most righteous person, I'm the smartest person, I have the right political beliefs, I'm like, no one could fool me because I have all the correct beliefs. And you don't really think about, oh wait, but those are the socially acceptable beliefs that almost everyone has. And well, then you're probably not asking real questions, are you? If you only believe the very mainstream, very politically correct things, and you never Obviously I'm not saying like just blindly holding fringe beliefs or anything like that, just as a matter of course. Like I'm not saying that's smart or good either, but if you only hold the most conventional orthodox mainstream views of the culture that you live in, well, that's probably, you're probably not questioning things the way you should. You're probably not really giving things the degree of thought that would be good, that would be helpful for you, and and so it's it wouldn't shock me at all if the Minnesota government used very cynically used the immigrant community, the Somali immigrant community, as a wedge to sort of like prop open this corruption agenda. Because it's perfect. It's like a perfect camouflage if you live in Minnesota, because most people, even if they get a whiff of something untoward going on, they would be absolutely terrified to give voice to it at all, because they'd be terrified of somebody judging them for it. And so often it just doesn't, people just let that kind of thing slide, and that kind of thing could happen anywhere. It just requires requires everybody being in this bubble, and then there being like some kind of political issue, something that you can that people are not allowed to question. So that that could vary depending on where you live and depending on what kind of like local culture you have. But if there's something that is just you're not allowed to seem like you're criticizing it ever, under any circumstance. Like if there's whatever it is in your culture, if there's something that is like just unchallengeable, and it is it's just basically you have to be really careful around it. You have to be very careful talking about it. You have to be very careful if you ask any questions about it that might seem critical, then people will probably want to tar and feather you, like whatever that is. It's very easy for then a homogenous political culture and a very very homogenous government, politically speaking, in terms of party. It's very easy for them to use that to perpetrate some kind of scam. It could be like and then so like in a an extremely liberal left culture like Minnesota, it's immigrants, it's it's diversity, it's anything like race related. And then I don't know, and then I'm just because I've never lived somewhere with like the complete opposite culture, so just me just kind of speculating. But I think I would think if you could have like a really conservative, really right state where you could have like, I don't know, people, as long as the government is like very together, very close, nobody really rocks the boat. And then you had something like, something like religious, like Christian, or, some kind of like charitable enterprise, something like that. Or like, I don't know, what would be something else, like, the military, veterans, like the military. You could do the same kind of thing, because it's like a similar kind of thing. Maybe not quite as extreme these days. I mean, that'd be fair. I think that'd be fair to say that, like, you probably have more people in, I'm just pulling out a random state, but like Alabama, you probably wouldn't get quite the level of camouflage from from like a religious or a military friendly kind of charity or something. Like you probably, there's like government money going to something like that, and then people got suspicious, you probably find more people willing to look at that a little closer. I would think you might have a higher percentage of people in today's climate than you would in a heavily blue state where people are very, and I mean, of course there are people looking into the allegations of massive fraud in Minnesota. So, so I could be wrong. I have not lived there for a long time. It kind of surprised me. I did not know until somewhat recently that the Minnesota, like they replaced the Minnesota flag with one that, you know, just aesthetically is fine, but it's kind of weird how close it is to the, like the Somali flag. And that does that. I mean, you know, I think that kind of, you know, I think that kind of tells you how you know, how PC and how, you know, how quick to virtue signal the people in Minnesota are, you know, at least the majority. Actually seems like in a lot of ways they might have gone farther left than when I lived there, in some ways anyway. But oh yeah, so the, you know, because of that orthodoxy, because everyone is so fixated on you know, fixated on the kind of the traditional, like politically correct, traditional left-wing kind of ideas and values, and, you know, what topics are taboo and what things you just like have to support no matter what, without, you know, without any question. Like you must be pro immigration, you must be pro diversity, you must be, you know, that kind of thing. So like, you know, if with that kind of culture, it's just like a given that you have to be very, you know, very orthodox about these things, or else, you know, people will judge you, and, you know, they might even hate you for it. And oh, so yeah, I think there's probably a great cultural fear. I think you know, a few brave people have very you know, very courageously and very smartly looked into these things, and, you know, like come up with some, you know, some troubling accusations and troubling evidence, and hopefully people get to the bottom of it one way or another. You know, we'll see. I'm certainly not holding my breath for anyone genuinely involved in massive state corruption to be held accountable in any meaningful way, but you also never know. It might happen, you know, and that would be great. That would be great to, because it's, you know, it's absurd, the idea that, it's absurd that state governments are just, you know, you can't let them rip you off that badly. That's insane. You can't let them just throw both hands into your pockets and just take everything out and turn you upside down and shake you loose, and then, you know, if you dare say anything about it, they insult you and you know, and call you names. Like, you can't allow them to do that. That's crazy. Whoever's doing it. In this case, it seems like Minnesota is doing it. The Minnesotan government is doing it to its own people, and sadly, a lot of the Minnesotan population is probably too spineless to, you know, think there's anything wrong with that. They're fine. Like, they're, you know, I mean, man, people there, like, you know, the main reason I moved away was because the people were not all of it. There were obviously good people. A lot of the Minnesotan population is creepy and off-putting, and I did not like living there. And, you know, and now that I'm older, I was also a teenager who you know, or I was in my early 20s when I left. I'm thinking about, like, the whole time I resented the people living there when I lived there. So I was, you know, so maybe I haven't been back there, and I don't know, like, geez, like 7 or 8 years. And I was only briefly visiting around this time of year, like 7 or 8 years ago, when I right after I had met my future wife. We went to visit my family in Minnesota. And so maybe now that I'm older, you know, in fairness, maybe my opinions would change. Maybe if I went back there for any meaningful length of time and spent some time with the people, maybe I would be more generous, and maybe I would be more tolerant. But I don't know. Well, you know, so part of what's annoying is that they're so, like, Minnesotans are so, they pretend to be nice, you know. They act polite but then they just, you can tell that they're not really, they're just too afraid to really act like themselves. And so they just kind of like hold everything in. And I hope I don't do that. I don't know. I think I am a little more open and sincere. I try to be, and I try not to. I try not to give into whatever vestiges of the residual Minnesota nice, kind of a fake nice thing that I might have picked up when I was living there. I don't know. I guess I need someone else to tell me that. I would need someone else to tell me if I broke free of that completely or not. But they are just so afraid of everything, and they're so afraid of anyone rocking the boat in any way. Which isn't to say that I wasn't, also part of the problem, treating them badly, because I did, and I'm not proud of that. I feel bad about it, but they also kind of, they're also half the problem. They also kind of brought it on themselves, if I'm being honest. But regardless, they are a bunch of cowards, and I say that not to be cruel, but I say it to be honest. Minnesotans in general are a cowardly people with very little backbone. So they probably have most of them probably, even with all these allegations of massive fraud and corruption, their state government bending them over every which way and taking them for all they're worth, they probably are fine with that. And they probably just beg for more, which is disgusting and shameful, but there's only so much you can do about it. Hopefully they get a little bit more backbone, and they are, maybe this will wake some people up in Minnesota, and they will realize that they shouldn't just let people run roughshod over them all the time, because then you get screwed over, and you just have to you just have to stand up for yourself at a point. Obviously, you don't want to be an ass. You don't want to be senselessly, belligerent, just without, when it's just going to cause problems, like people don't deserve it. You don't want to just be a belligerent jerk, but you do have to stand up for yourself, and you do have to, you do have the attitude that I won't let someone take advantage of me, which I think that's very reasonable. I think just saying, under no circumstances will I allow someone to just, take advantage of me and steal from me. Like that is extremely reasonable, It's quite unreasonable to have the opposite attitude and to tolerate people stealing from you and taking advantage of you. That's the unreasonable position. Unfortunately, that is practically the state motto of Minnesota, is by all means, please rob me. Who cares? Whatever. I'd rather be mugged than raise my voice or assert myself. That's kind of like the de facto motto. I think the new flag doesn't even have a motto. I don't remember what the old one was. The old state flag was a mess. It was just a mess of random things. So like, just on an aesthetic level, I can't fault them for changing it. Obviously, they should have changed it to something that was that wasn't worse, like in its messaging. Obviously, they should have changed it to something good if they were going to change the state flag. But so I don't think the new one has a motto on it or anything. I don't think it has any words. It's just a pretty simple like sunburst, I think. And but if they want to add one, maybe they should add, if they want to add a new state motto, come up with a new state motto, maybe they should put by all means steal from me, by all means, just don't ask questions, go ahead, take our money, we won't stop you, we won't ask questions. I don't know. I think that's pretty funny, but Yeah. So that's why, it's essential to be willing to ask questions, to be eager to ask questions, and even about things that, especially about things that society considers to be taboo. And, whatever, because obviously whatever every society considers taboo is going to be different, and whatever every culture considers taboo is going to be different. And so, it's going to vary depending on where you live and, who you live with and that kind of thing. But and that doesn't mean like just being like crass about it, but because obviously people won't like that, if you're just like attacking something that's held sacred in your culture, like people, people would sometimes fairly and some understandably get upset about that. So I'm not saying just be like actively disrespectful for no reason about these things, but nothing should ever be beyond questioning, or like if something is beyond questioning, if you're not allowed to ask questions about something, then I think that's a sign that more questions need to be asked. Like there needs to be more open conversation about it. And someone might be hiding something. If they don't want you talking about something, then ask yourself why. Well, why? Why not? I mean, why can't we ask questions about this thing? Why can't we investigate this thing? I mean, it's, why is this one thing? Because if we can't ask questions about this sacred thing, then it's the perfect cloak for someone trying to pull off something underhanded. If people are afraid to seem like they're criticizing something that they're not allowed to criticize, then people who want to get away with something and don't want people asking questions, well, they're going to obviously use that as a smokescreen to get away with what they're not supposed to be doing. Because if they know most people are afraid to ask questions, and they can easily shut them down by invoking the sacred thing, and I'm not saying sacred as in religious necessarily. I just mean sacred as in like something that's treasured by a culture, something that you're not allowed to be critical about, I guess. And because if someone wants to get away with something, then they're going to use the sacred thing as a shield and a smokescreen to deflect any criticism. And obviously, I mean, I know this isn't groundbreaking or anything. What I'm saying, I know this, I know that is old news, and that obviously people have been using that strategy for a long time, and yet it still works. And that's kind of the problem. People need to stop letting it work so much, because it has been a problem for so long. And so just stop letting it work, And I realize to an extent that's easier said than done, because, you actually have to like live in the society where this is going on, and you have to, it's not necessarily as easy as I make it sound, but nonetheless, it isn't as hard as people think it is either. You can do it. You can dig into sensitive subjects, and you can ask difficult, unpopular questions. And, especially in the United States, for the most part, we thankfully are, we have a much greater latitude of freedom to do that kind of thing and to ask the difficult questions than a lot of people do who live elsewhere. And obviously, it's not like it's a perfect situation we have here, but it's pretty good. Relatively speaking, globally speaking, it's pretty good, and we should take advantage of that. We shouldn't just shouldn't be afraid to ask the hard questions and dig into the sensitive, taboo subjects. And we shouldn't be afraid of being made unpopular or even hated because we dare to do these things, because we dare to ask the hard questions, because we dare to seek the truth and stop people from stealing from us and stand up for ourselves, even if people try to beat us down with the hammer of orthodoxy and conformity and the using taboo subjects.